right now, it's my pleasure to introduce Rita Hargrave, a neurologist, and we're going to spotlight her. I'm going to let her tell us what she's doing, who she is, where she's worked, and everything of importance. Okay, Rita, take it away.
Thank you so much. Yes, my name is Rita Hargrave. Make a little adjustment. I'm not a neurologist. I'm a geriatric psychiatrist, which encompasses a lot of neurology, but also includes, management of depression, anxiety, a lot of assistance and in helping families and folks who are dealing with the illness understand the illness more and help them collaborate more effectively with their caregivers. I often say that neurologists are on the spot figuring out what the illness is, and then it's psychiatry who lives with the caregivers and the person with the illness for the next 10, 15 years. So, once they've figured out what's going on and come up with a medicine, they're one and done. But it's really behavioral health in a lot of situations are the sort of continuing resources that people may access on a more regular basis. Now, my background comes from a real interest in behavioral neurology and how the brain affects mood, how it affects physical function, and the sort of things that people have to deal with over time. I spent, I'm do a quick summary. I'm from back east. I'm from DC. College, went to Harvard. Went to Howard University Medical School, traditionally Black college, a university for my medical school training. But I've been in California for many, many years and worked in Alameda County mental health systems, medical systems. Those of you who know Highland Hospital, my life has been centered around Highland Hospital for many, many years. But after that, I've spent the bulk of my time in the last 30 years working at the Martinez VA. So I spent a lot of times in veterans hospitals, clinics for many, many years. And all of those places have a substantial number of people who are over 65 with a multiplicity of medical and neurological problems. And I spent a great deal of time working in primary care settings with nursing staff in long-term care facilities. So I've had a lot of different experiences at various intersections of medicine, mental health, and how to make that work. So I'm going to, I've been very fortunate in the last year or so to work specifically with the Alzheimer's Association as a community educator. So the talk that I'm giving today is geared around behavioral issues, which you'll find in both Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. But one caveat is that, as you know, those illnesses can be confused, and there are a lot of significant differences. And I just want to highlight again some differences that have been highlighted in the last, really in the last year. There was a very large study that looked at the differences in experiences of caregivers of folks who have Alzheimer's disease compared to folks who have Parkinson's disease, compared to people who have Lewy body dementia, which is another sort of combination of neurological and cognitive changes. And as you know, the experiences are very different. Many times Parkinson's folks are a lot younger than Alzheimer's folks. Many times they're more mobile, more physically mobile than some of the Alzheimer's patients. And I think one of the things that was really surprising to me is the fact that if you look at the nature of who the caregivers are in Parkinson's compared to Alzheimer's, much more often in their study, the caregivers were adult children, as opposed to Parkinson's, and they were spouses. So again, a very different set of situations in terms of what the nature of the caregiver is, the kinds of things you're having to face, and who's actually doing that work. So and this is just the beginning of us really looking at how those three illnesses and the effect on caregivers, how different that actually is. So hopefully we'll see more. Now I'm going to share my screen and hope that that takes us where we need to go. Share. Okay, so this is it's about a 30-minute talk, and that will leave us plenty of time for more discussion and questions. Okay, let's go. There we go. Okay, so the talk is understanding and responding to dementia-related behaviors. Now, at the end of today's program, you'll be able to do three things. One, identify some of the common triggers for behaviors associated with dementia. Two, be able to explain the process of how you assess and identify challenging behaviors. So that's going to be your job, how to become a detective about how do you assess and sort out what your plan is going to be for managing challenging behaviors. And three, to list strategies to address common dementia-related behaviors. So it's a lot, but it's a great place to start. Now, behavioral changes and the things that we'll be talking about are, wandering, sleep problems, irritability. Now, those behavioral changes that you'll see in Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's can be due to many different things. There often are pretty common triggers. People are in pain or they feel uncomfortable. They may well be bored. They may feel frustrated that they're not able to do the things that they used to be able to do, or they can't keep up with the conversation. They may be in unfamiliar surroundings. Plus, they may be asked to do some complicated tasks. Like one of the ones I know that comes up often in terms of complicated, driving is a huge issue. And especially with bad weather, potholes, crazy drivers, it's a complicated situation for anybody. But if you also have memory problems, mobility problems, vision problems, that can cause a lot of upset. And I'll take just a moment to give you a vignette of how I saw this play out in my life. I had my mother was someone who suffered from Alzheimer's. And at the time, I did not recognize or know that that's what was going on. So I came to visit her in DC, and we decided to go out to lunch, or let's say I said, let's go out to lunch. So she and my father and I went to a restaurant at around 1 o'clock. And and it was at the change of shifts, so there was a lot of noise. This was not her usual time to eat. Nobody asked her about whether or not she needed to go to the bathroom before we went to the restaurant. And there's a lot of noise. So the waitress, who was already pretty overwhelmed, came by with the menu and basically stood around us and waited to see if we were able to figure out quickly what our menu selections were. And I sort of knew ahead of time what I wanted. My dad sort of felt the pressure of it and made a decision, but my mom, not so much. And within a couple of minutes, you could tell she was uncomfortable in the chair. She was frowning. She started to fidget, and she started to cry. So, that was finally the signal that we all figured out that we should take a breath and chill out on this. So I had unknowingly, and I didn't know any of these, I didn't think about any of these triggers or way to address them. I had managed to put her in a situation to experience all those things at the same time. She was uncomfortable. There was a lot of noise, so she was overstimulated. She was getting frustrated about trying to sort out what she was asked to do. She was in an unfamiliar situation, and she was being asked to make a decision on a menu that she'd never seen before. So all of those things together, I think, helped generate a situation that made her uneasy. Boy, I wish I had known that at the time. Okay, so think about that, how often those kinds of triggers are going on that may make the person with Parkinson's or Alzheimer's feel more uneasy. So once we've understood that there are triggers, the things that we really need to do as caregivers is to become the detectives, the Sherlock Holmes of how you address behavioral issues. So number one, the 4 issues that are most common that you can really decide ahead of time how you're going to approach: detect and connect, figure out what is the behavior that's going on that is difficult or problematic. 2, address the physical needs of the person first. Like I mentioned about, bathroom issues, physical discomfort, key into those and see if those might be contributing factors. Address the emotional needs, which can be a little bit tougher, but if you've been living with a person for a long time, you probably can have a pretty good idea of what anxiety looks like, what frustration looks like, what sadness looks like. And finally, you sort of design an intervention to help managing these behaviors and see if it works. And then if it works, that's great. But as we'll say over and over again, it's whatever the behavior is, it's probably going to happen again, and your strategy may not work the next time. So it's constantly reassessing and planning for the next time this comes up. Okay, so a little bit more about detect and connect. What we're really asking you to do is to join the person in his or her reality, like trying to see the world through their eyes. Like, again, thinking about my mother, she also had some hearing problems, some vision problems. And again, sort of feeling confused. And what does that look like? And understanding not only what the situation is, but also what's the context of what was going on in that restaurant situation. So who was involved? It was our whole family and the waitress. This happened at a restaurant which was far away from where she lived, and we were asking her to do a fairly complicated task of reading a new menu and being able to articulate what her needs were. When this was happening in the afternoon, which was much later than her usual mealtime. And how did this play out? She sort of had a meltdown. So we did at the time at least have enough insight to give her some more space and ask the waitress to come back later. So that was helpful. So it took place in an unfamiliar setting during a time where she was uncomfortable, but we were able to approach her calmly and respectfully and give her some space. So other things to consider: addressing the physical needs first. The things I would have thought about are medical issues. Medications that may have assisted in making her a little bit more confused. Pain issues, it's a huge one. And I know this happens a lot with Parkinson's. People's response to medications can really change over time. They're oftentimes in the process of managing Parkinson's. There may be many different medications that are changed over time. Physical problems are also really things that we need to look at, whether or not the person is hungry, whether or not, I talked about bathroom issues, whether or not they're thirsty, and lack of social interaction. Because again, this was a big change for her, because she's somebody that had basically been home with my dad, and she wasn't around a restaurant full of people. And finally, environmental triggers for discomfort. I sort of mentioned about hearing and vision problems. Those can also get worsened when somebody's in an unfamiliar situation. So again, thinking about physical needs, medical issues, physical problems, and environmental triggers. Now, the other piece, which is a little bit more subtle, but I think if you've been a caregiver or have lived with that person for a while, you have a sense of what their emotional needs are. So focus on their feelings, not the facts. When I say feelings, I mean, if you were in a situation where things were unfamiliar, you felt put under pressure, how would you feel? And if you can tell based on your ability to sort of read that person's emotional response, to actually say, gosh, it looks like you're feeling, I wonder if you're feeling a little uneasy or scared or confused. And again, so if you have the sense of what that person's perspectives are in terms of emotional needs, to be able to address your interventions to specifically reduce their anxiety, frustration, and most importantly, once you've sort of identified that, and even if they are not able to articulate whether or not you're correct, to find a way to redirect their energy into a more soothing activity. This is a vignette of a woman whose mother had Alzheimer's, and this is how she found a way to develop a strategy to help with her mother. Go.
She was part of the family. She pulled towels, and she pulled towels all day long some days. Just, put them back in the basket, and then she returns for some more towels. And it made it sound like it's cruel, but look, it kept her busy. It kept her movements going. It kept her, just kept her occupied, and it made her feel wanted and that she was contributing. We created a routine for her that worked for her around her agitation and, her sleep patterns. So every day she was in the same routine for the most part. And every day she did something. She was always in the kitchen every day helping do something. Sometimes she'd rinse dishes. but she was always near the kitchen sink because she spent most of her life in front of the kitchen sink. Now she was just doing it in different ways. And, going for a walk, going out in the car for a drive, walking around the yard, watering plants. Those are all things that she did, and we just had her continue doing them.
Again, a very good detective. She knew, she sensed what the issues were with her mother's emotional needs. She found a way to incorporate that into a strategy of connecting with her mother, in a physical way and giving her mother purpose. So that was, I think, a really masterful way of looking at not only the thinking of the person before the illness and where they are now, and figuring out a way to bridge that gap. So finally, after you have developed a strategy like the one that Rose did, to look and assess whether or not it worked. So you're going to continue to go back to connecting, detecting and connecting, joining the person's reality, and sorting out what worked well and what didn't. And if it worked well, that's great. And remember it for the next time. But if it didn't work well, what kind of adjustments can you make? And you can apply these strategies of detect and connect, addressing physical needs and then emotional needs, and reassessing to any behavior. So we'll talk, and this is not a solo activity. We really encourage people to sit down among other family members, friends who are caregivers, and certainly in the support groups to explore how other people are managing these very common behaviors, because you're not by yourself in doing this. And it's often helpful to sort of debrief with somebody else. It's also helpful to have somebody that you can call on if things start to get really frustrating and difficult. So having a buddy, even if you don't necessarily talk specifically about these behaviors, having somebody to check in with so that you're sort of emotionally and mentally clear enough to be able to navigate these issues. I call them the backup crew, the people that you call at 9 o'clock to discuss what's been going on that day. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about some very specific behaviors. And some of these are taken from Alzheimer's patients in the middle stages of Alzheimer's, maybe after they have had memory problems for a number of years. And I think one of the differences in Parkinson's is these problems can come up a lot earlier, that the timeline, the time frame may be a lot shorter, and they can happen at any point in the course of the illness. So confusion is a one that comes up a lot. So not recognizing familiar people, places, or things, accusing other people of theft. This is a big one. The keys are lost. Say your husband's keys, he can't find his keys. So as opposed to thinking that maybe he might have left them somewhere, the first thought is going to be, somebody came in last night and stole my keys. You may go out and to do some grocery shopping, and your spouse, even though you might have told your spouse that that's what you're going to do, because of the way the brain works with this illness, they may say, oh, you're just going next door to have an affair with our neighbor. So, and these things will seemingly come out of nowhere. But I think what certainly as a mental health practitioner, one of the things I think about is fear of abandonment, fear of being left, because particularly with Parkinson's, people recognize early on that the power balance has shifted. They are more vulnerable. So if they're not in your eyesight, that's a major threat. So you sort of fill in the blanks about what might be causing those feelings. But confusion and suspiciousness is one that can come up a lot. So, and this was an example is a woman named Anne who was having family members come over for a visit during the holidays. So this was a situation where she had only been the one dealing with her husband with Parkinson's or Alzheimer's disease. And suddenly the house was full of a lot of family and friends. But the her husband didn't recognize everybody. So he was very upset about who were these strange people coming into their house that he didn't know, and why were they there, and were they going to take things. So what had started out to be a potentially a joyous celebration got kind of taken off kilter because of his confusion and suspiciousness. So again, the same things that you would do: detect and connect, really identify what that suspicious behavior is. Like, when is it happening? And I think in this case, it wasn't something that came out initially, but as more people came, it really started to escalate more. Address the physical issues, physical needs. I've certainly talked about whether or not the person is in pain or has discomfort. Another thing we really need to look at is how well do they see? Are they seeing shadows? Do they need better glasses? Does the lighting need to be better? Hearing, another huge one, because all of those impairments of being able to perceive what's around you leaves it open for more confusion and discussion, confusion and suspiciousness. So again, figuring out when it's happening, addressing physical needs and addressing emotional needs. Again, with Anne and her husband, they had been pretty much the only ones who were together, and now there were all of these other people, so it was kind of scary. You know, imagine if you went into a situation where you're surrounded by people who know who you are, but you may not remember who they are. That, I would find that really scary. So again, so you start to create explanations to fill in the blanks about who these people are and why they're here. So one of the several things that could happen that can help with this is sort of recognizing ahead of time that these may be issues, and you can develop a strategy to address that, or discuss that with other family members. So again, it's really a matter of sorting out what are the problems that are happening or likely to happen, addressing the physical needs, then addressing the emotional needs, figuring out a strategy to deal with that, and maybe plan for the next time. So Anne may not have been able to do all of this the first time she had a bunch of family over, but it's something she can think about and work on the next time. Second, really important issue is aggression. Aggressive behavior can be either verbal or physical. And I think this is a particular issue for Parkinson's, because much more often than in Alzheimer's disease, we're talking about men. Men are much more likely to develop Parkinson's disease. And more often than not, the people who are taking care of them are often women. I think what's most disturbing about this is that it can happen suddenly for no apparent reason. So, you know, it's one thing if you sort of can sense if the person is feeling uneasy, if they're getting more frustrated, and there's a verbal outburst that comes out of that, that's a little bit more familiar for most of us. You can kind of see things starting to wind up to a blow up. But if it comes out of nowhere without any triggers, that's probably the scariest thing, because it came at you out of nowhere. So again, when and if that happens, and it's something that will happen over and over again, detect and connect. When did this situation happen? Like, who else was there? I often think about what time of the day does it happen. It's a very common situation in long-term care facilities for more irritability, more agitation to happen in the early afternoons. I mean, they call it sundowning, but I think it's doesn't have a whole lot with the sun going down, but it does have to do, particularly in institutional settings, there's a real shift in energy and the number of people who are around at that change of shift at 3:30. That's a time when things start to be, there are more people, there's a little bit more confusion. Maybe the folks are being cared for and not being given the same level of individual care they would get earlier in the day. And this is also a time when people, if they haven't been sleeping well, are going to be more tired. And it's in between meals. So there's like a lot of things that make that time of day particularly difficult. And that's when some of the aggressive behaviors, verbal aggression, physical aggression can come out. So with that in mind, so when it's happening, who's around? Physical needs, as we've mentioned, physical needs before, bathroom issues, pain, vision issues, all of those things can increase the person's likelihood to respond to frustration or confusion with aggression. Thinking about the emotional needs. Is that person frightened? Are they sad? Those are the kinds of things to continue to think about that might be contributing to an aggressive episode. So you taking into account what the detecting what the issues are, addressing the physical needs, and then the emotional needs, then having an opportunity to develop a plan, reassess that, and figure out what are you going to do the next time. So again, aggressive behaviors are usually upsetting but not dangerous. But occasionally the person is a danger to themselves or others, and safety measures are necessary. And I think, again, this is a huge issue with people with Parkinson's disease because of their fall risk. They're unstable when they walk. This can, if many of us fall, if we sort of have a sense of that coming on, we can protect ourselves. But people with, balance problems, tremors, walking problems, that aggressive behavior can cause significant personal injury. So again, Anna, as I mentioned before, often medications, particularly if there are changes, those can lead to more difficulties, not only in terms of people's ability to modulate their mood, but also, balance and walking problems. So really talk with the person's doctor about what might be going on in terms of their current medications or any other medical interventions. Finally, when everything else, like if this happens, in the middle of the night, calling 911 may be what is needed for that situation, for your own protection, for the protection of the person that is having these difficulties. And calling 911, if and when it gets to that point, to be sure that you let the responders know, and the person that you're calling, that the person that you're working with has a neurological disease like Parkinson's, because they need to know that ahead of time. So again, it's and this is again a situation where it's very helpful to be able to debrief with other people, with the medical care team, with the neurologist, and other family members and caregivers about how do you navigate these more aggressive behaviors. Now, repetition. Saying the same thing over and over again, asking the same question. That's frustrating, difficult to deal with. And there's a lot of different strategies. I mean, one of the things that I've seen is that, say you're going to have people over for dinner, or say a family member, like your son or daughter's coming to visit. You may tell the person, your person that you're caring for, that John is going to be here at the end of May. Now, if you mention that in February, you may be hearing for the next, I don't know, a couple of months, when is he coming? Who's coming? Why is he coming? And it's kind of part of the illness that memory sort of slips away. And I can imagine it can be really frustrating to have to continue to respond to that. And here's a further explanation and discussion from Dr. Fazio about this issue.
Repetition is really one of the most common and also frustrating behaviors for caregivers. It's important to really just take a minute, take a breath, and really think about how you could help that person with the answer that they're looking for. It really makes no sense to sort of bump heads with them and try to correct them or try to tell them to stop asking it, because they really can't remember that they just asked you that a minute ago. So thinking about how you could provide an answer that's reassuring, even though you might be doing it over and over and over again.
So again, we'll go back to Anne again. So Anne told her husband that their daughter was coming, and she told him a month ahead of time, because it didn't particularly stick. So she was finding that she was having to remind him who was coming, why she was coming, when she was coming on a regular basis. But it didn't happen all the time. So it was important to sort out when was this going on. And in her situation, it was something that would happen around 11 o'clock, 11:30, like just around the time when whatever coffee has kind of that her husband was taking has worn off. It is not lunch hadn't started. He had been sitting in a chair or been pretty much housebound for most of the day. So it tended to happen at that really dead time. It was important to address physical needs first. Again, if there's pain, discomfort, restlessness, and there often are really simple solutions to that. I mean, I find that the last, say, 3 weeks, when we've all been stuck inside, dealing with rain, not able to get out, that I get more wound up because I'm not able to take my usual walk. So that can happen to anybody, but I am aware of that, and I have developed a strategy for that. But imagine if you're somebody who hasn't sort of put that together, plus you're not able to sort of get up and take care of those physical needs. So it becomes the caregiver's responsibility to sort out what are the physical needs. Addressing the emotional needs. Again, I don't think we have taken as much time as we could to really recognize how, particularly in Parkinson's disease, where people's cognitive awareness is often much higher than what we think. That the anxiety about having somebody visit, the embarrassment about knowing that you were not who you were 6 months ago, and you're seeing your daughter or your brother, and the grief over it. I mean, those are things that may be below the surface that are generating this repetition. And again, thinking about what the behavior is, what the physical needs are, and also addressing the emotional needs, that becomes your job as the Sherlock Holmes of managing, as being a Parkinson's caregiver. So sorting out how are you going to respond to that and making a plan for it the next time it comes up. So that's repetition. Wandering, again, a kind of a common issue, a kind of scary issue. These statistics of 60% of people with dementia will wander. I'm not sure what the percentage rate is for Parkinson's, because it sort of depends on the person's, not only where they are with memory and attention, but also their physical limitations. I mean, for some folks, the first evidence of their Parkinson's is going to be a tremor, and they may not have walking problems. So they may be, if their mental capacity starts to deteriorate at a faster rate than their physical capacity, they may be folks that wander. On the other hand, people who do have balance problems, walking problems, they may not wander because they're afraid of falls. So it's very much an individual situation. We are very much still in the process of understanding what are the nuances of Parkinson's, and there's many different types of Parkinson's, but wandering is definitely a problem. So again, there's, in fact, I saw this situation not that long ago. I was going to Trader Joe's, and I saw a woman walking down the middle of the street with her night slippers on and a nightgown. It's at like 11 o'clock. But pretty quickly behind her, another woman came up, and who she knew, and took her to the side and took her back to her house. This was not her caregiver. This was not somebody that lived in the house. It was a neighbor who clearly knew what this particular lady's patterns were, and felt comfortable sort of approaching her and redirecting her back to her house. So this is the ultimate, to have that not only are you detecting and connecting, but to let people in the neighborhood be on alert that this is something that happens. Again, once she was returned to her home, it's a good chance that whoever was taking care of her needed to look at what some of the physical needs were. Was it confusion? Was it restlessness? Was it pain? All of those things that might contribute to why somebody would get up and wander out the door. The emotional needs. And so it's not only, irritability and anger, there's also boredom. Those things can lead to wandering. Again, those would be the things that the caregiver would really be it would be in their best interest to kind of sort out again, what's the behavior? This is wandering, like what time of day does it happen? This happened to be 11 o'clock, that kind of like gray zone I was talking about before. Addressing physical needs, emotional needs, sorting out how are you going to manage wandering the next time it happens. And there are a ton of sort of structural changes that you can make in the living situation in terms of reminders about somebody who's wander guards, alarms and doors. One of the places to look for sort of structural things that you can add to your home, there is ALZ store, really a useful resource to buy things to fit your house, to make it a little bit more difficult for the person if they decide that they're going to get up and, head for the door. But knowing ahead of time that is an issue, that'll give you some time to do some planning. So, I've talked a lot about resources. And the Alzheimer's Association has developed a huge array of resources that I think are useful for anyone who is caregiving for somebody who's having trouble with memory, organization, mood issues like depression and anxiety in the context of a neurological illness, with Alzheimer's sort of being the primary focus of this, but it's also quite useful for Parkinson's. So this can range everything from the Alzheimer's Navigator, which gives a lot of information, to the Community Resource Finder, which is a huge one. Who are the other people in your area who might be able to help you, not only in terms of managing behaviors, but managing finances, connecting you with support networks. And again, looking back at the Parkinson's support networks, which have developed in your area, are really, I think, underutilized. More people need to use those. And I think the ability to do this online, we were just having that discussion earlier, that the opportunities to get this information, to develop and connect with community, are even larger now, because you don't necessarily have to go into the same room, that you can see this on YouTube. You can call up friends across the country to be able to view and participate in these kinds of things. Now, another really important resource is the Alzheimer's hotline, the helpline, because I've had friends who have had older adults in their homes, and they're saying, yeah, I'd like to be able to sit down and read the website, but I'm too busy caregiving all day. I don't have time to do that. And the only downtime that they have is, like 11 o'clock at night, when the person is asleep, they have a chance to breathe. That's when you can call a helpline. So again, there's a lot of online resources, both specifically for Parkinson's, and others that are more globally related to folks with memory problems, and that would be the alz.org. So there's a lot of help out there. We really encourage people to use that and access that. And I think questions. We're at the questions period, but the helpline is 1-800-272-3900.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much, Dr. Hargrave. What I'm going to ask now is that people unmute themselves. And, that's that little microphone icon, just click on it so that you can ask your question. And the rule is just simple. Don't talk over other people, and it tends to work out. So if you have a question for Dr. Hargrave, now is the time. Jump on in.
Dr. Hargrave, my name is Bill Peterson. Just by introduction, I spent 6 years on the Northern California Board of Directors of the Alzheimer's Association. I have a tremendous respect for them and Alzheimer's, and now I am a patient with Parkinson's. My question is, it seems to me that many Parkinson's patients have more cognitive capability, at least for a while, than typically you'll find in an Alzheimer's patient. So we're more aware of the frustrations that our caregivers are going through. from a patient's perspective, what can I do to help my caregiver or care partner to deal with her anxieties over what she sees in me physically?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you're right that very often folks who are dealing with Parkinson's disease recognize the changes, not only in their own physical changes, their own memory and cognitive changes. They do see the additional stress that it's placed on their caregiver. And I think that study that I actually mentioned that compared caregivers across Alzheimer's versus Lewy body dementia versus Parkinson's really pretty clearly stated that caregivers for Parkinson's folks are under additional stress. They do report greater levels of stress. And I think recognizing is probably the first thing. And being able to talk with the person who's taking care of you and expand that network of people within your community, in your family, who can provide some respite, some support to your caregiver is a great place to go. Also, I'm not sure if you have specifically support groups that are for early stage Parkinson's. I know we have them for early stage Alzheimer's, with the kinds of things that you're experiencing. I'm sure other folks in the early stages of the illness are thinking about too.
Now, the thing that has struck me as so different in the two diseases is that with Alzheimer's, if there's a clear diagnosis, then there's usually some form of medical follow-up. In Parkinson's, the joke, I guess it's not a joke, is that you finally get diagnosed and there's nothing we could do for you, so we'll see you in 6 months. Good luck. Oh, by the way, and take these pills.
Well, unfortunately, that happens with Alzheimer's too. So that's my beef about the purely medical approach that we generally have towards chronic illness. Unfortunately, it's not unlike diabetes and hypertension, nearly everything else where you can't make a lot of money by seeing somebody for follow-up. So again, you're going to need to expand. Number one, if you feel that you need to be seen before that next 6 months, to really push for that. The other thing is it may not be your primary care doctor or your neurologist, but there may be other team members within that medical community that will be able to make contact with you. There may be nursing staff who are more available to take questions. I mean, there may be a number of other medical support folks, and also talking with people within Parkinson's support groups about what additional services they've been able to access that don't necessarily require a doctor's appointment. And I think the other piece of it is, because Parkinson's is so unpredictable in terms of what sorts of issues you will find you have difficulty with now, they may be completely different in 3 or 4 months. So to really have that line of communication with your care team, that there are changes that are going on that are concerning you and that need to get addressed.
Thank you. By the way, this group here, the Parkinson's Network Mount Diablo, is in fact my lifeline in many, many ways.
And everyone that you know, let them know that. Because there may be people that haven't really acknowledged that this is something that's going on. There may be cousins, there may be children, there may be other folks who know someone who could benefit by this kind of support group, this kind of network, and this kind of education. So get the word out there.
Thank you.
All right, other questions that you may have?
Prevent or at least slow down dementia or other types of behaviors that are what we're talking about today?
Oh, will those kinds of problematic behaviors slow down over time?
No, what I'm saying is, are there some strategies that we can use now to prevent or to slow down the occurrence of dementia or Alzheimer's-like behaviors moving forward?
Well, that is a $64,000 question, because there is no magic pill to do that. So
I was afraid that would be the answer.
But that doesn't mean there aren't things that can be can't be done. Again, I sort of look at it as the spectrum of long-term management of health issues. It's very much to me like, well, I'll be specific to Parkinson's. The more that people who have these issues are in a familiar setting, they have a regular schedule, they have a caregiver who knows them, that they trust, the more that you can, that caregiver is able to manage their environment so it's predictable and their needs are met. That's probably the best thing that you could do. So that it's, having people on, just think about, I don't know how many of you are retired, just think about the way that your life was structured when you were going to work every day. You knew what time you needed to get up, what time you need to get in your car and go to work. You knew when you were coming home. That reduced a lot, even though it was a headache, it reduced a lot of the uncertainty and anxiety of what am I going to do now? What is it? When should I eat lunch? Having that kind of, regular schedule, sort of unfortunately like what's in the hospital, but that kind of a regular, predictable schedule, I think is very comforting for people when they have memory problems. It's very comforting to have a caregiver who recognizes when you're feeling uncomfortable, when you're feeling sad, someone who can strategize with you. For instance, if you need to go to a medical appointment, which is not what you usually do, that you can work with that person to strategize, how will we prepare for that appointment? What time do we need to get up? What kinds of things do we need to do in terms of, and I'm always going back to bathroom things. I mean, it's huge issue, managing bodily needs. So structure, consistency, patience, and care. That's what seems to be the thing that works the best. And the caregiver having some space to take a breath. The caregiver having some space to sit back for a moment and just let go. Because it's a marathon.
Thank you for your presentation. I found it to be very helpful.
Good, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Can you comment on the difference between age-related memory loss and Parkinson's related memory loss? How you tell the difference, how you cope with it, what general questions come up, etc.
If you mean age-related, as in there's no additional illness like Alzheimer's, like Parkinson's. Again, Parkinson's is a real tough one because there are lots of folks who the memory stuff comes a lot, or let's say the detection of the memory issues related to Parkinson's can be buried underneath so many different things. It may be very difficult to tell that there is memory loss because there will be areas where the person is fine. And it's, I had a guy, in fact, especially if they are well educated. I had a gentleman who I was working with for, gosh, how long was it? It must have been like 6 or 8 months in a long-term care facility. And he was a retired banker who had managed, a huge collection of banking outlets, highly educated. And he had been doing that up until pretty far into his illness. So if you asked him about finances, interest rates, what's going on in the stock market, that's fine. But when his wife came to visit and she left, he was off to the races with, I know she's visiting that lover. She's trying to take all of my money. So doing a standard memory test would not let you know where the holes were. It would not tell you what were the types of things that would trigger his anger. So I think with, and things change in terms of the things people are able to do, they change at different rates. So I think Alzheimer's, it's pretty clear that you can, do memory testing, every 6 months or a year, and you can sort of parse out what are the areas that are problematic. Parkinson's is it's a lot harder, I'd say. And we are not sophisticated enough to be able to parse that out. Plus, we're still just beginning to learn the different types of Parkinson's disease. And there's so many, you can get Parkinson's when you're 80 or when you're 35. I mean, so they're almost like two different illnesses. You look at Michael, the sort of the poster child is Michael Fox. And I have other friends whose parents developed early Parkinson's in their late 40s. So that was a very slow progression that they were able to live with some assistance, with minimal assistance for long, long periods of time. But developing it later in life, that many times means that the symptoms will come up quicker and the whole progression will be faster. So the long answer is it's hard to tell. That's the long answer.
I'd be interested in knowing, for those of you who've got Parkinson's, I do, whether or not you find that during your off periods, your cognitive capabilities are not quite as sharp as they are when you're on. And have there studies been done about the effects of Cinemet on and off periods relative to cognition?
Gosh, I don't know about that, but that sounds like that, there probably has been, but I'm not aware of a study that's been that specific. The other thing I think that's really important is that you folks are knowledgeable enough. I'm sure you have pretty good insurance so that you actually can go, you have a consistent medical provider and hopefully a neurologist that you can consult with. And the diagnosis has been made. That's the long and short of it. There are a ton of people who are dealing with these illnesses who don't have regular medical care, who are not living in areas where there's a access to more specific neurological consultation is available. So they're living with this illness and nobody knows what's going on. So I think that's the other thing, that we sort of, under the best set of circumstances, if you have good insurance and access to medical care and a supportive family, those are the people who usually are participants in studies. Then there's everybody else. So there's a lot of unknowns in this.
Thank you.
And I think in terms of, specific responses to medications, that is such a very individual experience. And that's why we say, sometimes people will find that things that they used to be able to do before, they're having difficulty with. And even if it's not in the books, it may be related to their medication. So keeping that dialogue open with your primary care team about your individual responses to medications can make a big difference. I mean, I have a friend now who's having major issues with a particular blood pressure medicine, that he only is comfortable with one that's made by a particular company because the filler in this particular medicine is different from company to company. So you may have had that experience too. So again, that's a very individual physical response that if you're knowledgeable enough and have a good working relationship with your pharmacist, with your medical care team, that's an important one that you can pursue. So that's the other thing that may influence what an individual's response to a medication is. So keep the dialogue opening, and the benefit of that is now that there's a wider array of possible medication options, there is the chance that there's something else that will not give you the same kinds of problems.
Sure.
Dr. Hargrave, since you were talking about medications, my husband was diagnosed in May with Parkinson's, and he's been kind of psychotic, and he's been hospitalized for 6.5 months, and he's still being hospitalized. He's on clozapine right now, and that's a pretty strong medicine, but it seems to be working. He's his mind is coming back and he's more relaxed, and it's incredible. But he doesn't have a gastroenterologist. I don't know if I can pronounce it. It looks like that's something he's going to need because that's an issue with that medication. Is that right? That one has to get on board your team, somebody that understands the intestinal system when you're having issues with the medication.
Yeah, I say that's true for nearly anyone's situation, and particularly Parkinson's, because there are a lot of gastrointestinal abnormalities that are associated specifically with Parkinson's. But in terms of clozapine, that is the number one best treatment for psychotic symptoms of any kind, and particularly in Parkinson's. It is the medication of choice, but it does come with, a side effect profile. And again, it was not originally designed for working with folks with Parkinson's. So it was for people that had other mental health issues that didn't have the sort of physical component that's associated with Parkinson's. So everyone is still trying to sort out, how do we get the effect that we want in terms of reducing those psychotic symptoms, but also not to aggravate the gastrointestinal stuff.
Yeah.
So I'd say contacting the Parkinson's Association for specialists, and there probably are people who are working with those teams that would be great consultants.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Dr. Hargrave, that brings us, we're almost at the 1 o'clock mark. It has been a great presentation, fascinating. I want to remind people that we do record this and produce it on our YouTube channel. So within 48 hours, it'll be up there. And you can either go to our website at pnmd.net and click on the link to the YouTube channel. And if you choose, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, in which case you'll be notified whenever a new video, or an original video like this, is posted. So Dr. Hargrave, I want to thank you. Those of you who have been part of the presentation, thank you very much. You make PNMD a reality and to make it work for people.
Thank you so much for having me, and stay in there, keep swinging. Thank you.
Thank you.